Welcome to episode 6 of the next Starship, where I design and build my own ship for the Star Citizen universe. It's been a while, so let me give you a quick recap. I wanted to design and build my own spaceship, not to put it into the game as there won't be any modding support, but to create some cinematics and also for fun. So far I did different levels of sketches, from outlines to different perspective tests, outlined its role and purpose. I started to very roughly build that concept in 3D, and set up a VR scene so that I can actually walk around and get inside the ship to make sure the scaling makes sense. This is still very much the concept phase, and since I asked for feedback and said I might take some ideas and work them into the concept, I want to start this one with going over some comments I got before I continue the model in the second half. Too many engines and landing gear. For the engines, part of me agrees it does not really make sense, but in the drawing process I felt like it helped communicate this ship is more about traveling fast and far, rather than being primarily built for combat. But I agree, and I'll keep thinking about it. The landing gear, I agree 100%. I think I forgot to mention these are just parts that I took from the Gladius, so that it doesn't just float in this scene here. Neither the shape, nor the placement, nor the amount is final. I'll build something bespoke once the hull is done. Put a window in the top of the bed. Sucked when they removed that from the Aurora. Yeah, I agree. That was actually something I had in mind from the very beginning. Because if you travel a long distance and lay here to pass the time, it would be incredible to just watch the quantum travel around you. But then I came to the conclusion that a window would not make sense in a mainly military ship, because it would probably weaken the hull and increase the price. But now that someone else mentioned it, I might keep this closed for the stock version, but then create an aftermarket upgrade you could install, which basically adds screens to the inside that project what some cameras see on the outside. So given how advanced the technology is in the universe, it would convincingly look like a window from the inside, but still keep its armored back to keep you safe. Then many suggested to make the wings foldable, and this again is something I wanted to do in the beginning, but then I felt it would be unnecessary on this concept. On an X-Wing or a Scorpius, you could argue that the moving wings help in atmospheric flight, and for the Scorpius drastically reduce the size when it's parked, but mine's wings feel too thick to justify any of that, and also it would break the shape that I liked. Maybe I just don't see how the folding could improve the look, and I'm still open for ideas or suggestions. But so far I feel like a subtle change like on the F8 would be enough, and there already are those small wings in the back to give at least some cool transformation when it starts. And then finally, plenty of comments that a ship with a bed also needs a toilet. And just like CIG did on the Aurora or the Avenger Titan, I just ignore that, because that is where I draw the line between it would be cool if this design makes some sense, and I really don't care how hygiene would work in this fictional made-up scenario. But now, let's make some progress. I started with what I disliked the most in the last episode, the cockpit. This is where I left off, and so I started to create a handful of different variations. I honestly don't really love any of them yet, but they are all an improvement, and I have some options that reflect the concept, as well as a more rounded one or a split one that looks a bit like an insect with pincers. I continue to improve other areas of the ship before I make the call on the direction here, because the cockpit is important and I will need a lot more iterations, but that's okay. For now I went with one of the simpler ones that is closer to my concept. On the bottom it currently tries to continue the shape language of the back of the ship, and I like how that works with the detail on the belly, but I have to figure out how to make that work in the front. Speaking of, right now the front looks a bit too much like a duck beak for me. I'll fix that later, but what I'm happy with is the side view. I noticed in the last VR session that you don't really need the vision to the bottom sides, and it actually makes you feel kinda exposed. So this shape should give you better visibility in the front while making you feel more protected over your shoulders. And from the top I started to reintroduce the arrowhead-like shape of the window that I liked in my concept. Next I had to make some adjustments to the top and mid sections and the intakes, and came to the conclusion that there's a way better way to set them up. All these complex curves are very hard to adjust because they are twisted and turned on so many axes, So I rebuilt that part using so-called lattice deformers, which allows me to go back and change every individual curve and transformation without touching the other ones. It makes sure that the intakes and middle section align perfectly later on. I can experiment with some other shapes for the intakes without having to worry about getting all these curves done again. But most importantly, once I'm finished with the concept of my ship, I can build the final clean high detail version and just reuse these deformers, saving time and making sure they look the same, just higher quality. We call this a non-destructive workflow, and in a more professional 3D software like Houdini, you would always work like that. It takes more time to set up, especially because I had to rebuild it, but it will help me make tweaks and improvements quicker and better in the long term. I think I've heard that very sentence a million times on Inside Star Citizen. Anyway, lastly, I started to break up the middle section. Like the cockpit, I'm not really happy with it just yet. The round surface I introduced here is supposed to make everything in the shape flow towards the intake, but it may have distanced it too much from my concept, and then there are still some shapes in here that are too simple and don't make sense. But when I compare it to before, I think it's an overall improvement for now. So, while I'm not super happy with any of the new additions really, both of these areas I kind of feared before, because I could not really nail what I wanted them to look like in the drawings. And in these cases you just have to start somewhere and then iterate and improve on it. And there we go. I actually did a lot more in between episodes. I started building an Area 18 apartment. There are new concepts, but all of that has to wait until the next episode, because I will be heading to CitizenCon very soon. Should you have any ideas or feedback on the model, I'm very happy to hear it. And now thank you for watching, and see you in the verse.